Now, I'm not a gambling person, even though I admittedly spend quite a lot of money on Digimon and One Piece TCG, but I'm willing to bet money that if you approach any random person on the street and brought up the term Power Rangers, one of the things they immediately reply with is, it's morphin time. Power Rangers did a historic job carving out tokusatsu's fanbase outside of Japan, bringing this unique genre of transforming heroes to audiences everywhere. And while Power Rangers brought an entirely new flavor of hero to the table, one of the primary differentiations it had from anything else at the time was its ability to transform, or as they would coin, morph. Stemming from their take on Kyoto Sentai Zyuranger, the new property called Mind Morphin Power Rangers fully leaned into this term, becoming a staple identifying factor for the franchise for years to come. Along with various other aspects of their Japanese counterparts, Power Rangers would need to adjust several different components of the property in order to fit their needs. We've talked about a few of these already, like the name of the adapted show and the visual morphing sequence, but there's another thing that I find pretty interesting to see how it's executed: the morphing call. The henshins of Super Sentai would maintain as an iconic part of the franchise's concept, accompanied always by a catchy call or phrase. So, much like with the adapted names, Power Rangers' task becomes adapting that morphing call or phrase into one that fits their adjusted image, invokes the identity of the concept, and delivers the right amount of momentum that drives the Rangers to transform and don their iconic forms. And, well, that's what I'd like to go into today. I want to talk about the importance of the morphing call within Power Rangers specifically, while also taking a look at the overall nuances behind the henshin phrase. And, as always, I'd like to highlight some of the best calls that Power Ranger has come up with in their 30-year lifespan. So, I guess right now, it's morphin time. Now, before we get into Power Rangers, let's talk about the morph call as a concept, which I may interchangeably refer to as the morph call, morph phrase, henshin phrase. You'll get the idea. While it is a staple of tokusatsu, it certainly is not exclusive to it. Other franchises may utilize a particular phrase or call to initiate certain important actions, whether it be a transformation or a power-up. One of which I can think of right off the bat is Transformers, who very aptly use the term transform when they, well, transform. Having a phrase tied to the action is a very simple touch, but it can certainly go a long way. There's a lot of impact that's set off when a strong action is dictated by an equally strong phrase. It's almost like a set of magic words where the incantation sets the action into motion. Sure, it's kind of silly to have this sort of thing included, but that's what I think invokes the characteristically fun and vivid charm of something like Kamen Rider, Super Sentai, and Power Rangers. Super Sentai tends to have a pretty simple and sometimes formulaic way of executing their henshin calls. In a lot of cases, they just call out the name of their changer, or they'll attach the adjective or some related word of their series and slap on the word change afterward. There are a few outliers, but in a way, Super Sentai's henshin calls are much more structured and a bit more predictable than that of their adapted counterpart. While they instantly get more style points for being more creative than the simple henshin of Kamen Rider, they establish a pretty solid foundation for the Power Rangers adaptation to work off of. Sometimes they take this into consideration and sometimes they don't. Regardless, while being an arguably small detail in the grand scheme of things, the morph call that is landed on ultimately is a display of the team's ability to let their creative juices flow while remaining faithful to its source material and its own identity as Power Rangers. Now, I'm not saying they're all bangers, but much like the other adapted aspects, there is definitely a prominent flavor and twist that makes each one distinct from one another and iconic of the franchise. So, just how well does Power Rangers put together its morph calls from season to season? In a bit of a similar yet different manner from my adapted names video, I'd like to take a look at each season's morph calls and evaluate them on their thematic relevance and ability to drive momentum. I'll be looking at the main morphing calls of each team. I may also be comparing them to their Sentai counterparts, but not too much. That is, because of all things that are borrowed from Super Sentai, this is one thing that is oftentimes 100% Power Rangers. So let's get this tier list started. Let's start out with the one and only Mighty Morphin Power Rangers, where, like I said, the very term originates from. Their call, "It's Morphin Time," is undeniably classic. It's established itself as a timeless phrase that honestly becomes associated with anything and everything tokusatsu. However, many seasons moving forward tend to use "It's Morphin Time" less as their main morph call and more as the introduction to the sequence instead. Therefore, if it's treated as such, their full morphin call would technically include shouting the name of their dinosaur. It's not insanely creative, but it's kind of equally as iconic. It's at least more creative than the Zyurangers just shouting Dino Buckler. It's also kind of interesting that Tommy says Dragon Zord when no one else uses the word Zord, but maybe it's to fit with the flow of the 3+ syllables like everyone else. But it serves its foundational purpose well. 3. Later on in MMPR, the morphing call would update just a bit to become blank Ranger Power, with the blank being their color. This one kind of gets more generic, but it may also be due to the fact that aspects of Dai Ranger and Kaku Ranger are being integrated into the show, so it would maintain focus on the Ranger's color more than the identifying beasts. We do see this style of morph call utilized across the franchise, and whatever it is, it kind of just feels like a quick fix solution. It's a bit less impactful, but since this was the point where this was becoming a franchise, I sort of understand why they did it. 2. And while not necessarily a main team per se, we do have the Aquitar Rangers who call out, pretty similarly to the previous one, blank Aquitar Ranger power. I don't really have much to say about this one. It's an easy fallback, especially since the Aquitar Rangers technically didn't receive a full-on season. It also has nothing to do with their ninja theming, which, well, neither do the Aquitar Rangers themselves. It's one of those Power Rangers specific things that is interesting to say the least, but I'm not sure I really get behind, too. Moving into the next real team call, we have Zeo, where the Rangers return stronger than before, invoking new powers by calling Zeo Ranger blank blank, the two blanks standing for their numbers and colors. I've always liked this call. The number designation based on their shapes is so simple yet so smart. In comparison to previous calls, the differentiator is definitely more creative, if just by a little bit, except the Gold Ranger call, which lazily enough is just Gold Ranger power, but it's probably because he's the first Gold Ranger in the franchise. I guess it gets a pass. 3. Then we have the Turbo Rangers who shift into their Ranger forms with the call Shift into Turbo. As a phrase, I think Shift into Turbo is not the clunkiest, but for some reason it's not the smoothest either. After this though, they would follow up with blank Turbo Power, with the blank being the name of each of their Zords. Like Zeo, it adds an individual aspect to the morph, and honestly does it better than just calling out an obvious indicator of their Ranger status like their number or color. 3. These morph calls were pretty special in a couple ways. One, being the first of the franchise, they more or less set the tone for what morph calls would be moving forward, and 2, they added that small dash of individuality there, so each ranger technically had their own distinct call. While this is all done with varying levels of creativity, after this we would dive into the main style of morph calls, which would be the same phrase for every core ranger. Our first example of this new uniform style is in Space, where they initiated their morph by calling out the very apt, "Let's rock it." This is a really fun morphing call. It's short, punchy, and really utilizes the theming in a fun way that is both silly yet impactful. It, through its rocket imagery, really propels the momentum forward when the call is invoked. 5. The Lost Galaxy Rangers don their star powers by calling out Go Galactic. I think this phrase is also simple and impactful, if not a bit less so. It's no secret that the word go is pretty overly used within the franchise, so this sort of feels like another example of its overuse. However, because of the alliteration that Go Galactic has, it's very easy to see why they would pair the two together. While not being as punchy as Let's Rock It, Go Galactic still serves its purpose well with a cosmic finish. Quick tangent though, why did Leo say Go Galactic twice in Forever Red? Kinda weird, right? 4. Coming to the rescue are the Lightspeed Rescue Rangers who prepared themselves for emergency response through the morphing call, Lightspeed Rescue. Okay, so I don't really have a huge problem with this, or at least I didn't when I was a kid watching the show. Looking back on it now, it is kind of really uncreative to just use the exact name of the show as a morphing call. What I think happened though is that the name Lightspeed Rescue was so cool that they couldn't really think of a morphing phrase to effectively emulate this coolness besides Lightspeed Rescue. I guess it's better than GoGo 5's Chakso, and I guess it's kind of telling in itself how good of a name Lightspeed Rescue is that it doesn't even need another morphing call. I'm a bit conflicted, but I can't deny that it flows quite well, delivers its punch, and races in with that emergency urgency. 3. The Time Force Rangers activate their time powers by calling out Time Force. And hey, this is actually kind of a peak morph call. Maybe it's because I have a weakness for puns and wordplay, but this call is just so well executed. It leans into its team name and simply yet creatively alters it just a bit for it to be a commanding statement. This does such a good job of honoring its name and also its concept and invoking the colorful nature of Power Rangers as a whole. 5. From the jungles of Animarium, the Wild Force Rangers summon the Spirits of the Earth through their morphing call, Wild Access. This is one of those rare instances where the morph call is almost the same as its Super Sentai counterpart in comparison to Gao Ranger's Gao Access. It essentially follows the same formula, and I don't have much of a problem with it, although does Access really have that much to do with cell phones? I'm not really sure. 3. As the franchise's first season under Disney, as well as its first official incarnation of ninjas, the Ninja Storm Rangers would activate their shinobi powers with their call, Ninja Storm Ranger Form. This is also a great example of wordplay that is so natural and simple. The inclusion of the phrase Ranger Form after Ninja Storm is so smart because it does put forth a ninja-like energy that allows the Rangers to invoke their hero forms. And to take it even further, the morphs of the other Rangers, the Thunder Rangers and the Samurai Ranger, swap out ninja for their respective terms, adding a distinguishing flair for their specific concepts. It's really so cool that each subunit has their own distinct call, while feeling so uniform at the same time. It's a very short, succinct, and strong call that invokes true ninja power. 5. Bringing back the prehistoric might, the Dino Thunder Rangers morph by calling out Dino Thunder Power Up Ha. To be honest, I always thought this call was very lazy. It feels like they were really pressed for time in thinking of this call, and they just slapped together the most generic thing possible with an attempt at flashiness by including Ha, which I always felt was kind of weird that the Ha was an actual part of the call. While Dino Thunder as a name is pretty top tier, the associated morph call falls very short of what the name delivers. 2. With sirens blaring, the Rangers of SPD answer the call to action with SPD Emergency. Much like the Ninja Storm call, this is another example of really good wordplay. I think using emergency in this specific setting does add some stylistic urgency. It's also a much better usage of the word in comparison to Deca Ranger's call, Emergency Deca Ranger. It almost feels like SPD established their morph first, and then Deca Ranger, in an attempt to stay similar, just took the word emergency and slapped it along with their name. Like its name, SPD and SPD Emergency seem to have performed so much better for Power Rangers than its Sentai counterpart, which is not something I'd say lightly. 5. By saying these magic words, the Rangers of Mystic Force don their elemental powers via the incantation, Magical Source, Mystic Force. I don't know what else to say, it's amazing. The Mystic Force morph call is one I've always adored. It's so playful and fun, effectively emphasizing the Rangers' magical abilities as the source of their heroic might. It's a call that I'd be really proud to yell out if I was a Power Ranger. It's absolutely fantastic, and dare I say, magical. 5. Turning up the speed is Operation Overdrive, whose Rangers call upon their powers by shouting, Overdrive, Accelerate. Now, we've already talked about how Bokenger is a season whose theme is really adventure, but sort of has a confused high-speed motif thrown in there. As Power Rangers, this high-speed theme definitely took center stage, with its name and morph call as two clear examples. The morph call is, well, a little bland. I sort of wish they did what they say during their roll call, kick into overdrive, but I get the feeling that since Bokenger Start Up sort of had a two-part pace to it, they wanted to emulate this as well with Overdrive Accelerate. With this and the Rangers' general execution of the morph call, it does fall a bit flat, too. Bring in the Fury are the Jungle Fury Rangers, who invoke their beast brawling abilities by calling out Jungle Beast Spirit Unleashed. Now, I have a lot of love for this morphing call. Is it perfect? No. But does it do well with the material it's been given? Absolutely. I think it's pretty clear that the martial arts aspect of Geki Ranger would only be adapted to a certain degree, and as the adapted name implies, the focus was put more on the beast spirit aspect. And I think this call works really well in matching the pacing that the original Geki Ranger one had, while being more fun and explosive. It's super solid and flows very well, and it honestly makes me forget about those solar morphers. 4. Hitting the gear shift are the RPM Rangers who call out to transform, RPM, get in gear. I've talked a bit about RPM already, and one of the things that I liked about the season was that it put the morph call into a realistic context within the show's environment. This phrase is intended to be a vocal recognition security factor to initiate the transformation only by authorized individuals. There's a bit of an alliteration going on there with get in gear, and I think it's paced well to match Goenger's call as well. It's not the most creative thing I've seen, but it's solid, I'll give it that. 3. Now, I'm going to lump these next two calls into each other because they will ultimately receive the same rating, and these are the morph calls for Samurai and Megaforce, being Go-Go Samurai and Go-Go Megaforce. Now, I think the value of the morph call overall is its ability to convey Power Rangers' charm as an action-packed yet playful franchise. A lot of this is due to its acceptance of its campiness. However, a problem that Samurai and Megaforce had wasn't necessarily just the acceptance of campiness, but an aggressive effort to replicate it regardless of the time and context. When Saban took Power Rangers back, the replication was definitely a primary focus, and with that, we got these soulless and uninspired morphs that call back to the classic line, Go-Go Power Rangers. Both these seasons suffer from the fate of having to reconcile adapting a Sentai season with reviving Power Rangers glory days, neither of which I'm sure was executed super well, and if anything, this morph call is a constant reminder of that. 1. After the silliness of Samurai, Megaforce, and Super Megaforce, the Dinos would make a resurgence through the Dino Charge Rangers, energizing themselves with the morph call, Unleash the Power. Now, while Dino Charge has the benefit of a really creative and effective concept, this call is very generic. You could really apply Unleash the Power to anything. I honestly wish they used the word energize in place of Unleash the Power, so that their full phrase would be Dino Charger engage, Dino Charge energize. In my opinion, while it is a simple word to use, it more effectively ties itself into the battery theming. It's not bad, but it misses out on being more thematic and borders on being too generic. 3. From the shadows come the second coming of the ninjas, with the Ninja Steel Rangers embracing their ninjutsu with their call, Ninja Spin. So this, I'm not too sure about this one. It's alright, sure. It's very matter-of-fact and straight to the point. It's quite literal, actually. It's focusing your attention to the Ninja Star and the gimmick to initiate the change being a Ninja Spin. It's way better than Go-Go Samurai, but I can't help but feel like there could have been more done with this call. Although I can't really think of anything else, so I'm just gonna have to admit that it's solid. 3. After the ninjas, the franchise would change hands again and show us how Hasbro would execute the iconic Power Rangers morphs. I did a video on this very topic actually, it was probably one of my earliest videos, so I'll try to be brief. Activate Beast Power has always kind of bothered me as a morphing call that seemed way too generic. However, I have to give credit where it's due. The original source material of Go Busters had their henshin call as, "It's morphin time, let's morphin," a clear homage to Power Rangers as a whole. And while that is a funny nod to Sentai's counterpart franchise while still tying itself to the show's concept, I gotta say that it too is very generic. It doesn't stand out to me as iconically Go Busters, I just remember it as a funny Power Rangers reference. So while I still feel that the animal focus of Beast Morphers was an interesting direction to lean in, they at least committed to it with their morphing call. It's not the best of the bunch, but it shows some moxie in comparison to its counterpart. 3. Link to Morphing Grid. Okay, I get it. Canonically, the Dino Fury Rangers are intended to be the first team of Rangers, hence the super generic morphing call, right? Well, I still think it could have been way better. You could probably contest and say that MMPR's morph call was really generic while the source material itself was very stylized, but that context is way different. At the time, we didn't know any better, nor did we have the history to compare it to. Now we do, and I think this call is a bit of a disservice to the Ryosoulger's source material and the creative capacity and history of Power Rangers. A lot of folks have said it before, but Evolution Revolution would have been infinitely better, especially considering the gimmick 1. I know this video sounds like it's going to end on a negative note, and that's really not what I'm going for here. The morphing call is something that I think Power Rangers and Power Rangers fans should take a lot of pride in. It's one of the many challenging aspects of Sentai that needs to be adapted, and for better or for worse, it's always done with that signature Power Rangers flair. And while Power Rangers isn't the godfather of this type of concept by any means, their take on the morph call has been pivotal in cultivating the images of Power Rangers, tokusatsu, and the henshin hero genre at a global scale. Here's my tier list of Power Rangers morphing calls. Which ones are some of your favorites? Which ones do you think do better than their Sentai counterparts? Let me know. That's all I have for today. I'll be back next time with more fun Toku topics to Toku talk about. See you all next time.